What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. I'm going to talk about the first round of the NBA playoffs, and I'm just going to kind of ramble about each series, recap each series, and, you know, since I like to switch up the camera angle a little bit for these videos, I switched it up a little bit, and I got my feet up. I'm chilling. I'm making this video earlier than I thought I would be making this video. I did not think I'd be making this video tonight, and none of the first round series went 7. The higher seed won all of them. Very disappointing, very anticlimactic. I thought this could have been potentially one of the most entertaining first rounds of an NBA playoffs in maybe years, maybe since 2014 when there was a bunch of Game 7s, but it was the exact opposite. There was no parity. There were some entertaining moments, don't get me wrong, some entertaining storylines and whatnot, but overall, in the grand scheme of things, I thought it was going to be more competitive between different teams. And I'll go into the series and talk about what I think each team should look at moving forward and whatnot. Now, as you know with these videos, I just kind of ramble and I don't edit them. So if I make mistakes, trust me, when I record, I make a lot of mistakes. If you ever see the cuts during a recording, it's because I probably butchered a word. So, you know, in these videos, you get to see it all. So, anyway, let's jump into the Western Conference, and I'm just going to go 1-8, 4-5, 3-6, 2-7, you know, because that's kind of how the bracket goes. So, starting off with 1-8, it's Suns, it's Pelicans. The Suns got a little bit of a scare. The Pelicans were competitive in this series. Really, the only lasting thing is Devin Booker came back, and he should be good to go for the second round, and the Suns survived without him. Chris Paul had some terrific games. Chris Paul also had a game or two where he didn't really be aggressive enough. He wasn't aggressive enough, but obviously capped it off with that 14 for 14 shooting night, which was a phenomenal performance by him. CJ McCollum struggled in the series for the Pelicans. I saw a lot of people defending Joe Cronin and his trade of CJ McCollum because CJ McCollum struggled, but the trade still worked out for the Pelicans. They were trying to make the playoffs, and they made the playoffs, so it doesn't matter how CJ played in the playoffs. That's what the Pelicans wanted to do this year, and they brought him in, and he helped them achieve that. And he helped them be competitive in the playoffs as well. Even though he struggled defensively, even though he struggled to make his shots, Mikal Bridges was on him for the majority of this series instead of being on Brandon Ingram. Without CJ McCollum, this Pelicans team gets swept in this series. Just the mere factor of his offensive game, the mere threat of his offensive game made it so that the Phoenix Suns had to devote some defensive attention to him. And I always argue the narrative that if CJ wasn't making shots, he wasn't helping the team. I always thought just him being out there, being a floor spacer, spacing the floor for others, giving them space to attack the rim, do that sort of thing. And then, you know, also he requires putting a good defender on him to slow him down. And Mikal Bridges was one of the best defense players in the league this year, and he had to spend a lot of time on him to try and slow him down, and he did, but it allowed Brandon Ingram to go off. So I thought the CJ slander from Portland fans that were happy to see him fail was kind of silly to me. I don't know why you'd root against the guy. He loved it here in Portland and was also loyal to the organization and wanted to be here his whole career and was a true professional off the court. I don't know why necessarily you'd root for him to fail. I understand maybe not being bought into his success, but rooting for him to fail was a little bit weird to see some Blazer fans do, but you know, who am I to tell people who and who they shouldn't root for, you know? So CJ struggled, it sucks, but you know, the Pelicans almost made this series go 7. It just, you know, none of the series went 7, unfortunately, even though there was some competitive battles. So the Pelicans moving forward, if they get Zion back and healthy next year, are definitely a force to be reckoned with. A potential sneaky home court advantage pick with CJ McCollum leading the way, kind of being the leader in the face of that franchise. You know, Zion Williamson, if he's healthy, could definitely be their best player next year, but it becomes a conversation where you have a legitimate big three guys that 2 of them have made all-star games, and then the one who hasn't is arguably their best player with CJ McCollum. So you got a solid big 3 there in New Orleans and some solid role players now, Herb Jones, Larry Nance Jr., and so forth. And they have potentially a top 4 draft pick to add to that. New Orleans is going to be freaking scary. And it all started with it started with drafting Zion, but the CJ McCollum trade and getting great value on that trade, which they got great value on that trade. I've made 2 rambling videos about it. has really catapulted them into a serious threat in the future, in my opinion. Phoenix moves on, and they'll play Dallas, and I think Phoenix is going to actually have an easier time with this series. That's my bold prediction. But jump into Dallas and Utah. I don't want to talk too much about Dallas. I still feel like Dallas is a little bit overrated. I feel like Utah's been a team that has struggled to make it out of the first round of previous seasons. For whatever reason, they're not a team that plays super well in the playoffs. So I think Dallas got a pretty solid matchup here. I mean, you're talking about a Utah team that couldn't take care of a Dallas team without Luca Doncic, and I'm not impressed by the Dallas Mavericks without Luca Doncic. I mean, basically the Jazz are just frauds, and I'll get into them in a second. But Dallas finally gets out of the first round for the first time since they went on their championship run in 2011, so congrats to them. But I think outside of Luca, you don't have one star-level player. I mean, Jalen Brunson has been playing like a star, and I didn't expect him to play this well going into the playoffs, so I definitely have to give him his respect. But out of all the teams left, he might be the worst number 2 guy on a team because, I mean, I don't know. If I think of a team as I go throughout this video that has a worst number 2, I'll point it out. But they got lost okay role players, and then it's Luca. And Jalen Brunson has stepped up to be a secondary scorer and done a pretty good job this series. He torched the Jazz in this series. But I think when he ends up going up against a better playoff defense in Phoenix, I think he'll struggle a little bit more, and I think the Suns actually take care of business in 5 in this upcoming series. But congrats to Dallas for making it out of the first round. Now let's talk about Utah. They need to figure out what their direction is, and they have 3 options right now, in my opinion. They can either stay the course, which hasn't borne fruit. I forget the saying. It hasn't been fruitful for the Utah Jazz sticking to this roster. They haven't been able to get out of the first round since Donovan Mitchell's rookie year, if I recall correctly, and then they lost in the second round. So they haven't been true contenders with this roster, and they're stuck in a position where they owe a future pick, and it's like protected through multiple years, kind of like the Blazers pick is. So they don't really have a future pick to trade. They don't really have any good young talent outside of Donovan Mitchell, so it's not like they can trade some prospects to try and get better now around him. And they're not obviously bad enough to get a good draft pick or keep their draft pick, depending on the protections. It has weird protections. Maybe it's simple now. I don't know. But it was the pick they gave up in the Mike Conley trade, I believe. I don't remember their pick situation. I'm sorry. I'm not that much of a genius, and not that. I remember a lot of like future pick scenarios with different teams, okay? So give me my credit for that, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. But going back to the 3 routes that they have, is stick the course, and, because I don't think upgrading is an option. They just don't have the assets for that. So it's kind of just running it back next year and hoping the same recipe equals different results, which I think would be kind of crazy. People will say the Blazers did that for multiple years, but they did bring in, they drafted Anthony Simons at 24. They did make splash moves for Robert Covington and Norman Powell. And some people say, oh, that's not a splash move. But for Utah, given their asset situation, getting guys like that would be a splash move. So it's stick the course, and that's probably not the right option for them. The second option is to trade Rudy Gobert and maybe try a 1 to 2 year rebuild / retool while keeping Donovan Mitchell, because Donovan Mitchell is still young enough to kind of be a part of the future, and there is or has been some discord between Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell and them not liking each other. So that's option number 2. And then option number 3 is just a complete rebuild where they trade both Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. So it'll be interesting to see what they choose. I don't think they can run it back next year. It hasn't worked out in the playoffs. So those are 2 guys that are potentially on the trade market. Doesn't really affect the Portland Trailblazers because they don't need another guard, and going after Gobert doesn't make sense. It isn't really feasible, and going all in on a center is just dumb for the Blazers. You're going to have to let Nurkic walk in free agency because he's not going to come in as a 20-minute per game backup. And then you're also going to have to trade probably your own first-round pick and then salary to match. Going after a center doesn't make sense. So neither of those guys are on the trade market for the Blazers, but it could open up some potential 3-team trades and some interesting scenarios depending on who wants those guys. So, if a Toronto wants a Donovan Mitchell and they're willing up to give up a Pascal Siakam, and Utah wants a top 4 pick and the Blazers pick jumps up, then you're talking about, the 4th overall pick for Pascal Siakam with Donovan Mitchell being the middleman there. Could open up some intriguing pathways to certain players for Portland that they didn't already have. So Utah, I think they should blow it up. I don't know if they should trade Donovan Mitchell or not, but they definitely have to trade Rudy Gobert this offseason. It just has not worked out for them, and they don't have the assets to get much better. Now let's look at the 3 vs 6 series, which is Denver versus Golden State. Denver is just injured. Nikola Jokic can't beat Golden State on his own. He could beat Portland last year on his own, but not Golden State's more proven playoff team, a more successful historically playoff team. Jordan Poole kind of broke out, was a young guy that made some noise in this series, and I think, I don't know, I don't want to make any predictions that he will struggle in the next series because they're going up against Memphis. I could see him going off against Memphis as well, but Denver just doesn't have the perimeter defenders to be able to put up against a guy like a Steph or a Jordan Poole. Aaron Gordon, I still think he's overrated defensively. There was multiple times he got beat on the perimeter. He's more of a Robert Covington-esque type defender to me instead of somebody that's just going to lock up on the ball against guards. I have never, ever been impressed with his defense against guards. So they don't really have any perimeter point of attack defenders, kind of like Portland. And even if they get Michael Porter Jr. back and Jamal Murray back next year, which they should, they still have that problem. So that's something for them to address this offseason. But wasn't really much of a test for Golden State. It was a pretty easy matchup for them. I still don't think the Golden State Warriors are like, yesteryear's Golden State Warriors. They definitely have a chance to make a championship run and win a championship this year, but I don't know. Some of that magic they lost when Klay went down, and Klay came back and has had some solid moments, but he hasn't really looked like prime Klay Thompson, which is to be expected. 2 major injuries, so it'll be interesting to see if he, what sort of moments he has in upcoming rounds, if he has some vintage Klay moments or whatnot. But it's been kind of the Jordan Poole show for them, so that'll continue on into the second round. And then they'll be facing the Memphis Grizzlies, who took care of the Minnesota Timberwolves, who cannot keep a double-digit lead. They choked 3 double-digit leads for losses in this series. If they could just hold on to a double-digit lead, they would have won this series pretty easily. So I think that just goes to their inexperience. First playoff series for Anthony Edwards. Second playoff series for Karl Anthony Towns because he made it with Jimmy Butler. And then D'Angelo Russell made it with Brooklyn. So those guys have been there before. But first playoff series for Jaden McDaniels, he had a big game 6, hit some shots. He is definitely a good draft pick for them a couple years ago. But first playoff series for a lot of guys on Minnesota, and they made some bone-scratching decisions and mistakes in crunch time throughout this series, and had some shoddy shot selection as well. So Patrick Beverley was obviously a great pickup for them. They became a better defense. He kind of became their heart and soul defensively. It's just a team that could not keep a lead, man. And I don't really know what their plan should be this offseason. Obviously try and get better, but they're a team that can kind of sit back and say, we made the playoffs, we had a competitive first round series, now we know what we got to do better next time, when we have a lot of young talent that will get better going into next year, so we should be a better basketball team that's also more seasoned when the playoffs roll around. So they're a team that could stand pat and maybe just try and make marginal upgrades. They don't have to take a swing for the fence or do anything drastic. And then as far as Memphis goes, I still do not believe in the Memphis Grizzlies. A fast break team that hasn't been in the second round before. I mean, none of these guys have been in the second round before. Desmond Bane, John Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., this is Memphis' first second round since, at least since the Marc Gasol, Mike Conley days. So their transition team, those teams tend to struggle a little bit more in the playoffs, and I think Memphis struggled at times to score. John Morant had a bit of a rough series in this one, and this isn't a Minnesota team that's a great defensive team. They got some good defenders here at Vanderbilt, Jaden McDaniels, etc. But I think if Ja struggled against Minnesota, it's going to be even more of a struggle against Golden State. So he's going to have to figure out how to get himself going as their leading scorer. Golden State's going to be a true test as a team that's very experienced. It's going to be an interesting second round series. The youth versus the experience. The Golden State Warriors on the comeback and the Memphis Grizzlies on the come up. So it'll be interesting to see. You got two transition teams, but Golden State plays better in the half court, in my opinion. It'll be interesting to see if that's the deciding factor in this series. Now, let's jump to the Eastern Conference. You got Miami beating Atlanta. Atlanta's a team that could swing for Donovan Mitchell. They are one of those teams that have gotten themselves into a position where they have a lot of young talent, but it's not a lot of young talent that I see getting a whole lot better. Like, I think John Collins throughout his career is going to be pretty much what he is right now. Trae Young throughout his career, I think, is going to be pretty much what he is right now. And then you have some marginal guys. DeAndre Hunter's had injury issues. Maybe he can take a jump if he's able to remain healthy for a stretch. And then, you got like Kevin Huerter and some role players that I don't really see becoming fringe all-stars or anything like that. So they're kind of in a position where they went on their Eastern Conference Finals run last year, came close to making an NBA Finals, surprised everybody last season, then took a step back this year. They could maybe look to move off Nate McMillan, but I don't think they do so. They're in a position where it's really hard to see a path to them actually contending for a finals in the future. It's kind of weird to say about such a young team, but I feel like they might have peaked last season because their pick's not going to be good enough, and they I just don't see enough internal development to get them to the point where they're contending for a championship truly. So it's a situation where they're going to have to take a swing at some point, and maybe that's this offseason. If a guy like Donovan Mitchell becomes available, even if a Rudy Gobert becomes available, they could look to move off of Clint Capella. Trae Young is one of the best lob throwers in the league. Trae Young and Rudy Gobert pick and roll would be interesting. So Atlanta has some young players, like I said, that could entice Utah. So maybe they could get a deal done. Maybe John Collins is a part of that deal for Donovan Mitchell. I don't know, but I would think that Atlanta is going to look to be aggressive this offseason after losing in the first round against the Miami Heat. And the Miami, I still don't know what to think about Miami. I don't like them over Boston or Milwaukee. But Philadelphia is a weird team. We'll talk about them in a second. It's going to be an interesting second round series between those two teams. I think those two teams are battling for a spot to lose in the Eastern Conference Finals, in my opinion. So, Victor Oladipo has had some good moments. It sounds like he's healthier than he's been in a while. So maybe we haven't seen the last of vintage Victor Oladipo. That's pretty cool. And then, of course, Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry, Bam Adebayo. You got dudes there, so wouldn't rule out them making another finals run, this time not in the bubble, but we'll have to wait and see. They'll have a true test in the second round against Philadelphia if Joel Embiid plays, but it sounds like there's a chance that he doesn't play because he was up 30 in a closeout game with 4 minutes left, which is ridiculous. I'm just getting mad for my boy Romp. Because imagine being a Blazers fan and you're about to close out a team. You're up 30 with 4 minutes left and Dame is still in the game and he gets hurt. Imagine how pissed off you would be as a Blazer fan. I am, Doc, why was Joel Embiid in up 30 with 4 minutes left in a closeout game, man? Did Doc Rivers really think that they could choke that game if they took Joel Embiid out? I mean, it's just shades of Derrick Rose when he got hurt, when they were up double digits with barely over a minute left. And I mean, that was a more understandable situation than up 30 with 4 minutes left. So Doc Rivers really kind of screwed that one up, and it could spell the end of the playoff run for the Philadelphia 76ers with Embiid and Harden. Harden still, I don't think Harden was the right move. He's kind of struggled. That's the funny thing, is everybody's talking about CJ McCollum struggles, but Harden, I mean, he isn't the same as he used to be. He's lost a step, and it's funny because my guy Romp, man, was complaining about how Toronto's defense was making James Harden isolate. And James Harden used to be one of the best isolation scorers, but in the playoffs, when they let more physicality go defensively, you're not able to get to the free throw line as much. So I've always thought playoff basketball makes it harder for guys to try and bait fouls so much. And James Harden has always been one of those guys. So when you combine that with the fact that he's lost a step, I don't think his game is necessarily the best for playoff basketball. He's still obviously a really good player, but I don't think he's going to have the franchise-changing impact in the playoffs that Philadelphia thought he was going to have. And I still think C.J. McCollum and Robert Covington and a package like that would have been better for Philadelphia than giving up a first-round pick and Seth Curry just to get James Harden instead. So it'll be interesting to see if he can kind of carry them, because he's going to have to. If Embiid misses time, he's going to have to carry that team against Miami. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. And then Toronto was on the losing end, and I go back and forth on what I think they should do. I know what I want them to do. I want them to trade one of Pascal Siakam or OG Anunoby, because they have Scotty Barnes as well. Those are 3 forwards, right? So if all of them deserving starters, so you either have to play OG Anunoby as the shooting guard, or you have to play Pascal Siakam as the center. In order to start all 3 of them, you have to play one of them out of position, in my opinion. And I want them to just sit back and say, well, we shouldn't just play one of them out of position. We should trade one of them and maybe get back a player that fits as a center or as a shooting guard. Maybe the center is Miles Turner. Maybe they trade OG Anunoby or Pascal Siakam for an early draft pick and take Chet Holmgren to be their center of the future. Or maybe they go the shooting guard route. I don't really know, but that's what I want them to do. I don't know if they should do that, though, because I don't know if they're going to be able to get back enough to really justify that, and I feel like they won't. I feel like they'll just run it back next year and think, oh, if Scotty Barnes can take another step, then we can contend. And I don't know how I feel about that for the Toronto Raptors, but obviously I'm a little bit biased because I want Pascal Siakam or OG Anunoby on my favorite basketball team, the Portland Trail Blazers. So it'll be interesting to see what they do this offseason. I just feel like they're going to kind of run things back next year. So it could be anticlimactic for them. And if they do run it back, I don't think they're making it out of the second round next year. I think they could make a second round depending on the matchup, but I think it's going to be tough for them. So second to last series, the 3 seed versus 6 seed, it was Milwaukee against Chicago, and Chicago struggled to be good teams all year, and Milwaukee ended up missing Chris Middleton for the majority of the series. He ended up getting hurt, and once Chris Middleton was out, they just started blowing out the Chicago Bulls. And it's not that they're better without Chris Middleton by any means, it's just DeMar DeRozan's game has always been kind of weird in the playoffs. Zach LaVine was playing injured, but Zach LaVine has had his fair share of some injury issues throughout his career, and Vucevic's game fell off a cliff this season. And, I mean, you got some solid role players with Alonzo Ball, with an Alex Caruso, but I don't think this team is particularly close to contending, given that Milwaukee just wiped the floor without their second best player with Chicago. Chicago was a team that struggled to beat good teams and beat up on bad teams all season long. They had a really good record against bad teams, but when it came to beating the best of the best, the cream of the crop, they didn't do that. So that's what you got to do in the playoffs if you're going to be successful. I don't really know where they go forward from here. Of course, they have Portland's future pick they can trade. It's just a situation where I think you got to make another move if you're Chicago and try and get something else. Maybe you try and pitch Patrick Williams, Lonzo Ball, and some future draft picks, and you have to attach another salary. Maybe you try and go out and get Donovan Mitchell, and you think that Donovan Mitchell could take you over the hump, and you play like DeRozan is kind of a de facto point guard, and then you got Donovan Mitchell and Zach LaVine. You got Vucevic as well. That could be an interesting lineup, so maybe they're a team that tries to make some noise. I just think they got to go out and get another guy in order to really hang with a team like Milwaukee, because they weren't able to, even without Chris Middleton. For Milwaukee going into the second round, they'll play Boston. I think this is going to be the best second round series, the most competitive series. Boston has been playing phenomenal. Started off the season kind of slow with their new coach, and then they figured things out. They had a bunch of players-only meetings and a lot of frustrations early on in the season, then went on a hot run, figured things out. Ime Udoka, I think, has done the best coaching job this year, the way he was able to turn around the situation in Boston and get them playing the right way, and it's resulted in them being a serious contender. They look like a serious contender, and they sweep the Brooklyn Nets with KD and Kyrie, man. That's going to be a fun second-round series. Right now, without Chris Middleton, I have to go with Boston in that series. I think it's going to be Boston-Miami in the Eastern Conference Finals. Shades of didn't Miami play Boston LeBron's first year in Miami? maybe the timelines didn't overlap like that. I don't remember, but if that's true, it could be a rematch of that, obviously with different characters. But as far as Boston goes, it's going to be fun to see them go up against Milwaukee. That's going to be a true test. Brooklyn wasn't a true test, and people thought that it was going to be a true test for them, but the problem with Brooklyn is they isolate too much, play too much iso ball, and outside of KD and Kyrie, they don't have anybody they can consistently rely on to create offense. Seth Curry is a shooter that can do something off the dribble here and there, but he's not someone you consistently rely on to create. Same thing with Joe Harris, who they were missing in this series. Same thing with the Patty Mills, Goran Dragic. They're kind of over the hill, so they don't really have that guy that can create offense. They got Bruce Brown, who's a good defensive player, but in the series, they didn't really have a lockdown guy either outside of him. So KD is a good defensive player now, but Kyrie isn't. So it's a situation where their defense wasn't good enough to carry them, and offensively, when you isolate, even if you have two of the most talented players in the league, if you play iso ball in the playoffs, it's really easy to game plan against and kind of load up on those guys and make life difficult for them. And that was the case for KD and Kyrie. They struggled throughout this series. Iso ball just doesn't work in the playoffs. I've tried to say it multiple times before and gotten a lot of pushback on that notion, but I think it's been pretty obvious if you paid attention to the playoffs. But, if you have a different opinion, whatever. It's just they need to go out and get another shot creator, and Ben Simmons didn't play in the series, so question marks with him. But if he comes back and plays next year and you have that lockdown defender, and then you can go out and get somebody else that you can rely on to create shots, then this Brooklyn team could be a contender next year. I just think they need one more shot creator, and they need Ben Simmons defensively in order to, throw him up against Jason Tatum, Jalen Brown, etc., Giannis, if they face Milwaukee at some point. That's really what they need. So it'll be interesting to see what the next situation with Kyrie is. Obviously, there's been a lot surrounding him, and seems kind of unpredictable. So I don't know if they continue to struggle. If he wants out of Brooklyn, I can see that happening. It's going to be interesting to see what happens next with that, but definitely a huge disappointment for Brooklyn. They won as many playoff games as the Portland Trail Blazers did this year. That was not a successful season for them. So anyway, that wraps up me talking about the first round of the NBA playoffs. Let me know what you thought about any of these series. Let me know what you think about the second round series that we have on tap. I'm looking forward to hopefully a Game 7 at some point this playoffs. It just sucks that there is not a single Game 7. Do or die basketball is always the funnest type of basketball, and so far we've only gotten that in the play-in. So hopefully one of the series goes 7. I am down for Milwaukee and Boston to go 7. That will be a fun Game 7 if that happens. But let me know what your predictions are for these second round series and what you think maybe some of these first round losers might do in the off season. With that being said, that's a wrap for this video. Thank you for watching. I'm out of here. I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.